EC3, what opponents could EC3 face now that he's returned to Impact Wrestling? Of course, EC3 returned to the company at Slammiversary. We haven't yet seen EC3 in official in-ring action. We've seen a little bit of physicality from the former TNA World Heavyweight Champion. We saw him attack Moose a couple of weeks ago on Impact. He's also recently stated that his aim and his reason for returning to Impact Wrestling is to capture, once again, the TNA World Heavyweight Championship and burn its legacy to the ground. So it looks like we're going to have a Moose versus EC3 feud in the near future over the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. I suspect this is likely going to take place at Impact Emergence in a couple of weeks' time on Access TV, so we'll wait for an official announcement from there. But obviously EC3 returning to the company, like many speculated he would, has led to people guessing and questioning who he will be facing throughout his tenure in Impact Wrestling. Of course, I've picked a few names out about who potentially EC3 could be facing in this new run in the company. First of all, obviously Moose. As I mentioned, Moose is the obvious choice. He's the name that EC3 has said that he's going after now that he's returned to the company. This was always the case. This was always the plan as far as I'm aware. EC3, his music played a couple of weeks before he even made his debut, or return rather, at Slammiversary. Moose had defended the TNA World Heavyweight Championship against Hernandez successfully, as he's done ever since becoming TNA World Heavyweight Champion, or announcing himself rather as the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. So Moose gets the victory over Hernandez, and then next thing you know, EC3's old Trouble, Trouble, Trouble theme song is playing. The announcer's confused, Moose is confused, we don't know what's going on, and then Moose's theme played eventually. Now Moose would mock EC3, mock the Control Your Narrative promos that he's been doing on social media. He even showed a picture of EC3, and as I mentioned, after EC3 made his return at Slammiversary, even though it was on the screen, EC3 did in fact return to the Impact Zone. He attacked Moose after Moose defeated Falabar to retain the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, hitting a net breaker on Moose. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, he has referenced that his reason for coming back to Impact Wrestling is to erase his past and burn down his past. And a major point of his past, of course, is the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. EC3 is a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion, a two-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion. So he wants to capture that belt from Moose and then get rid of it once and for all. So obviously Moose is an opponent that EC3 is going to have in the near future. But what about some other names? What about Ace Austin? Now Ace Austin at the moment looks to be in a feud with the Good Brothers, Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson. I suspect that we're going to see Ace Austin and Madman Fulton go up against the Good Brothers at Impact Emergence in a couple of weeks' time. That looks to be the angle that they're going for. But what about a future match between Ace Austin and EC3? Well, I think it would work really, really well, actually, because EC3 during his period of there was meant to be, you know, the up-and-coming next big star in Impact Wrestling, and to a certain extent, he absolutely was. He was even though he had been in WWE before as Derek Bateman, he really got his best success in Impact Wrestling and became a bigger star in Impact Wrestling. And the reason he went back to WWE was because of the name that he made for himself in Impact Wrestling. And at certain points, I would suspect that he was actually what Ace Austin is now to Impact Wrestling, if that makes sense. Ace Austin is seen by many, myself included, as one of the future big stars in Impact Wrestling, and he was teased in the Slammiversary main event for the vacant Impact World Championship that if he'd have won that match, he would have become the youngest world champion in the company's history. Now, they've still got about a year to pull that feat off, and I do think within the next year, I do think Ace Austin will be the Impact World Champion. I think they are going to try and erase Tessa Blanchard from the record books, as at the moment she is the youngest Impact World Champion in the company's history. So I think there's a lot of parallels there between Ace Austin and between EC3's Impact Wrestling careers. So I think a feud between them makes a lot of sense in the future. Now, obviously, it depends what EC3 is doing at the time, whether he's involved in the World Championship picture, which I will think. I could see these two facing off for an Impact World Championship. I still think that come Bound for Glory time, I think leaving Bound for Glory, I think EC3 is going to be the Impact World Champion. So I think a great contender to face him after he becomes Impact World Champion would be Ace Austin. So that certainly is a feud to watch out for in the near future. What about Eric Young? Now, Eric Young, arguably, out of all the people that returned or made their debuts with Impact Wrestling, Eric Young, in my opinion, has made the biggest impact, pun intended, out of all of those names. Obviously, he's been on social media quite a lot, and he's been in just the media quite a lot in general with a lot of interviews. He's spoken about his WWE tenure. Obviously, a bit like EC3, came to WWE, had success in NXT. I would argue that Eric Young probably had more success in NXT than EC3. But had success in NXT, and then once they got to the main roster, once they got to Raw and SmackDown, Willie Mack was not a fan, so they didn't get any opportunity whatsoever. And then since being released by WWE back in April due to the COVID-19 budget cuts, since he's returned to Impact, Eric Young, I don't think anyone's been able to touch him. He, in my opinion, has been the best out of all of these new signings. His segments, his promos, his angle at the moment with Rich Swann really is, in my opinion, the best thing going on Impact Wrestling right now. I think it's just that good. I think the angle at Slammiversary between Eric Young and Rich Swann was just tremendous, and I was so already massively invested at that point anyway. But then we get to Impact Wrestling this past week, and we have the retirement speech by Rich Swann, and then we have the attack by Eric Young, attacking the surgically repaired leg once again, and it's just brilliant. And Eric Young, to me, looks like he's going to have a future Impact World Championship match against Eddie Edwards. I suspect that will happen at Impact Emergence, and I think that Eric Young will also face Rich Swann at Bound for Glory in October. To me, that looks like the direction of his character right now. But let's not put an EC3 versus Eric Young feud, rather, just completely off the table right now. After Bound for Glory, I think anything can happen, and as I mentioned, Eric Young is just got so much momentum and so much hype around him right now that I think a feud between two guys criminally misused by WWE would actually make rather some compelling television on Impact Wrestling. So I'd like to see Eric Young versus EC3 in this different environment of Impact Wrestling square off against each other. I think that would be really interesting. Now, what about some other names? What about Ken Shamrock? Now, I think the use of Ken Shamrock in Impact Wrestling has actually been fantastic. I think, obviously, look, he's, 55, 56 years old. He isn't the Ken Shamrock that he once was. Ken Shamrock can still kick anyone's ass, though. I mean, he could kill me, and he could probably kill the majority of the people on the Impact Wrestling roster. So his age doesn't make him any less legit. Now, can he go like he used to in the ring? Obviously not. He's, as I said, 55, 56 years old. But he's still of value to Impact Wrestling. He's a TNA Hall of Famer or an Impact Hall of Famer. And he offers a lot to the company in terms of name recognition, in terms of star power, in terms of having that legendary superstar still go on the roster. So before Ken Shamrock winds it down, and I don't see him doing that anytime soon, to be honest, I'd like to see Ken Shamrock face off against EC3. That's a match that we haven't seen before, be a first time ever. Ken Shamrock, you know, he's still a big name, and he wants to work with the best guys that Impact Wrestling has to offer. He wants to prove that he's not finished yet. Why he isn't a WWE Hall of Famer yet, I have no idea. And why he never got that call to return to WWE, I have no idea. Do I think he'll return to WWE for a future match at this point in his career? No. But I've been really enjoying the work he's been doing in Impact Wrestling. The feuds with the likes of Moose and the likes of Sami Callihan, I think, have been very well done. And as I mentioned, I think the use of Ken Shamrock in Impact Wrestling has just been very, very good. So I'm down for a Ken Shamrock versus EC3 match. I think EC3 is talking about burning down the past and getting rid of the past. What a better way to get rid of TNA's past than have a feud with Ken Shamrock? That, to me, is quite interesting. So I'd like to see Ken Shamrock go up against EC3 also. What about Rob Van Dam? Now, Rob Van Dam is an interesting one in Impact Wrestling at the moment. I've seen a lot of people unhappy with what RVD's doing in Impact Wrestling at the moment. Obviously, he's paired with his real-life girlfriend, Katie Forbes. And some people are saying, oh, this is ruining RVD's legacy. This is, you know, doing all of the twerking and all this sort of stuff. First of all, I don't think RVD cares. He's just happy living his best life, and he absolutely is living his best life at the moment. If you just check his social media, check his Twitter, check his Instagram, he's very, very happy doing what he's doing at the moment. So I think fans need to calm down when it comes to that. He doesn't care what people think about what he's doing, what he's done in the past. He's a very spiritual person and a very present person, so I don't think he really cares. He can still go. Again, with the Ken Shamrock thing, obviously RVD isn't the same age as Ken Shamrock, but is RVD as good as he used to be? No, but RVD can still do things in the ring that people wish they could do in the ring. RVD is an innovator, a trailblazer, an icon in the pro wrestling business. He absolutely is. Part of that ECW revolution, was a huge star at periods of time in WWE. former world champion, done it all in WWE, former Impact world champion too. I'd like to see RVD go up against EC3. I think it'd be an interesting match. I would like to see, because I wouldn't say RVD is a comedy character at the moment, far from it, but I think when you have Katie Forbes adding in the commentary and the over-the-top nature, I think that would make an interesting contrast to the likes of an EC3 and his very serious, very gritty, very control-your-narrative character at the moment. I think that would be interesting, and I think the match itself would be pretty damn good too, so I'd be interested in seeing that one. Now, obviously, RVD at the moment is feuding with this man. What about Sami Callihan? Sami Callihan deserves a lot of respect, I think. Obviously, he got a lot of crap for the incident that happened between him and Eddie Edwards all those years ago on Impact Wrestling, where he hit Eddie Edwards in the face with a baseball bat. Unfortunately, people called him reckless, people called him dangerous. I felt that was unfair to him. It was an accident. Should he have been a bit more careful? Yes, but it hasn't stopped his career. If anything, it actually helped his career. Former Impact World Champion, was part of the feud of Tessa Blanchard, beat Brian Cage on the first episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. And he deserves to be rewarded for what is a lot of hard work with Impact Wrestling. During the last few years, he's been pretty constant and has been a real interesting presence on Impact Wrestling television. Now, I think having someone... The feud between Sami Callihan and EC3 could be so interesting because Sami Callihan at the moment is portraying the sort of hacker gimmick again. He actually tried to do this gimmick in NXT, and apparently Triple H just wasn't a fan of it. But he's brought it back in Impact Wrestling recently. He's been working as a babyface. I prefer his work more as a heel. I think he just works better as a heel. He does his best work as a heel. He does his best promo work as a heel. And I think the EC3 gimmick, look, the EC3 gimmick has been very social media heavy and been very vignette heavy and sort of interrupting the feed of the program and that kind of stuff, and it's very similar to Sami Callihan's character. So I think a war between those two, whether it be over promos or vignettes and having similar things, or you can have EC3 doing these control your narrative promos on social media or on Impact Television, and they can then be hacked by Sami Callihan, who interrupts them and says, don't listen to this guy, he's just, you know, full of it, blah, blah, blah. I think that would be, again, a really interesting thing to have, interesting feud to see in Impact Wrestling in the near future. I think Sami Callihan and EC3 would pair off quite nicely as well. Now, what about Mike Bennett? Mike Bennett, the Miracle. We don't know where this guy is heading up at the moment. He's one of those names, along with his wife Maria Kanellis, that was released by WWE back in April due to the COVID-19 pandemic budget cuts. His non-compete clause expired at the same time as everyone else's back on July 18th, but we haven't seen where he's going to sign it next. He's a former, of course, X Division champion in Impact Wrestling, known for his time in Ring of Honor as well as a tag team guy, but once he signed with Impact back in 2016-2017, he really shone as a singles competitor along with his wife Maria. Now, some people are questioning, because we haven't seen Mike Bennett yet in Impact Wrestling, does that mean that he's going to be going to AEW? It's possible. Cody Rhodes has been doing his TNT Championship Open Challenge recently on Dynamite and on pay-per-views. Could we see Mike Bennett on there? It's an absolute possibility. Cody Rhodes and Mike Bennett did have a feud when Cody was in Impact Wrestling. It was Cody and Brandy versus Mike and Maria. So that's certainly possible. But I don't know about you, I'd really like to see Mike Bennett return to the promotion which really helped him stand out as a single star in professional wrestling. So I think that Mike Bennett versus EC3 will be a fun feud. Obviously they were two names that were released by WWE back in April due to the COVID budget cuts. Again, they can both have the sort of similar story of got a point to prove, got a chip on my shoulder, you want to control your narrative, what about my narrative? Mike Bennett can sort of be like, you know, you feel like you were misused and buried and not used properly. I got fired with a pregnant wife and a small child at home. What happened to you? If there's anyone that deserves to be PO'd about what happened, it shouldn't be you, it should be me. So that could be a fun storyline there. What about EC3 versus Willie Mack? I'm a massive, massive fan of Willie Mack. I think he's just such a tremendous athlete. You would look at him and you don't think he's capable of doing the things that he does inside the ring. Nevertheless, he manages to pull it off every single time. His matches with Chris Bay, I was a massive fan of for the X Division Championship. To me, I am such a big fan of Willie Mack, purely because as X Division Champion, he embodied everything that I enjoyed about the X Division back in the day with TNA. These guys, that there were no weight limits, it was about putting on great matches, having that high-flying style, but if you could do it at any size, you could be X Division champion. And that's what I really enjoy about Willie Mack. Is he your traditional cruiserweight? No. Look at him. He's over 200 pounds. You wouldn't think he's capable of these things, and yet he's doing backflips, moonsaults, all of this high-flying stuff. He's just an unbelievable athlete. And I think there are better things to come for Willie Mack in Impact Wrestling. Of course, he was a former NWA National Heavyweight Champion as well. So he's got credibility. I think that a Willie Mack versus EC3 feud would be a great contrast, because you've got the serious nature of the EC3 control your narrative character, and then you've got the Willie Mack who's very laid back, very, you know, not a lot bothers him, but I think the matches would be great. EC3, look, his work in the ring, is it amazing? No, his work in the ring isn't the best. What makes him stand out is his look and his promos. I think his promos could actually help elevate Willie Mack, whose promos are fine. They're a little bit one-dimensional. I think he's improved quite a bit recently with the whole Rich Swann retirement storyline that he's been doing on Impact Wrestling. He's been cutting some quite emotional promos about his best friend, so I've been enjoying that, and I've enjoyed that step up, quite frankly, by Willie Mack on Impact Wrestling. But I think to get to the next level, he can feud with someone like an EC3 and really stand out and show people truly what he's capable of from a storytelling point of view. Now, I mentioned Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson earlier, but how could potentially EC3 feud with the Good Brothers? Now, I made a video yesterday about potentially the Aces and Eights making their return or debut at Impact Emergence. Now, it's nothing confirmed. It's just me speculating. Will it happen? I don't know. I'm almost doubting it will, but I think the Aces and Eights returning, their last chance to return is at Impact Emergence. If it doesn't happen then the reports that it was a red herring, it was just to get people interested in Slammiversary, get people talking about Slammiversary, etc., etc., then that's all been proved to be correct, which would be a shame. But if you've got the Aces and Eights do return, and you do have Gallows and Anderson's being a part of that, I think a Gallows and Anderson Aces and Eights feud against someone like EC3 could be very interesting. I don't think EC3 should be involved in terms of the actual group of Aces and Eights, because I think he works better on his own. He doesn't need to be a member of a faction. He needs to be a leader of a faction. Could he be the president of Aces and Eights? Look, he could. I don't know if that's the best role for him. Does EC3 really come off as a guy that's going to be a leader of a biker gang? Not really. I pitched previously that maybe EC3 should have his own feud called The Narrative. I think that would be very interesting, and maybe have The Narrative face off against the Aces and Eights. I'd certainly be interested in that. We mentioned some ex-WWE names in this list that haven't signed with Impact Wrestling yet. Mike Bennett. We know that Brian Myers is coming in. Why not have Mike Bennett and Brian Myers and EC3 be part of a stable called The Narrative, and they feud with the returning Aces and Eights? That includes Gallows and Anderson, the Good Brothers, maybe Bully Ray, Velvet Sky, maybe Heath as well. I think that would be something very, very interesting. I love a stable warfare and faction warfare. I'm a sucker for that. So perhaps that could be the case. Perhaps we could see EC3 against the Good Brothers in the near future in Impact Wrestling. And of course, what about the Impact World Champion himself? What about Eddie Edwards? I think that this is very, very likely to happen, and I'll tell you why. As I mentioned at the top of this video, EC3 is likely to be facing off against Moose in the near future. It's a given. EC3 has said that his reason for returning to Impact Wrestling is to become TNA World Heavyweight Champion. Moose is currently the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. It hasn't been announced yet, but I think it's highly likely we get Moose versus EC3 at Impact Emergence. I think that EC3 will defeat Moose at Impact Emergence and become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. Now, he's spoken about, he being EC3, pronouns pal, he's spoken about burning the legacy of the TNA World Heavyweight Championship to the ground and removing it from his history and the history of Impact Wrestling. I think he'll defeat Moose for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship at Impact Emergence, and then I think he will challenge Eddie Edwards for the Impact World Championship at Bound for Glory in a unification match. TNA World Heavyweight Championship versus Impact World Heavyweight Championship. We finally find out who is the true, real world champion in Impact Wrestling, EC3 or Eddie Edwards. As I mentioned, I think EC3 becoming world champion again in Impact Wrestling is a matter of time. I think he's probably the biggest star they've got on the roster right now, which is big, which is a big statement because obviously they've got a lot of big names, but he's the one that I would build the company around going forward. He's the one that I would put the belt on and say, look, we're improving in popularity, we're getting bigger, we're getting better, we're getting fans back. A report's just come out to say that Impact is the most watched program on Access TV right now. So what would you do with that? You put the Impact World Championship on him and you ride him to the moon. And I think that's going to be the case. So I think we're going to see EC3 versus Eddie Edwards at Bound for Glory for the World Championship, for both the Impact World Championship and the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Winner take all unification match. Impact Wrestling versus TNA Wrestling. Past versus present. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on potential feuds for EC3 now that he has returned to Impact Wrestling? Let me know your thoughts on who you'd like to see EC3 face in Impact Wrestling in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. I really enjoyed chatting with you guys on this channel. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give us a like on the like button. It really does help us out on YouTube. Get up the recommendation feeds and get to people's recommendations who haven't watched the videos before. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. We're on the road to 700 subscribers on that long road to 1,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already, please do subscribe, and if you have subscribed, just know that I'm incredibly thankful for you taking the time to listen and watch my videos here on this channel. You can also follow us on our social media platforms. They're on the screen right now. The links are in the description box as well. It's at 365 Wrestle on Twitter and at Wrestle News 365 on Facebook and Instagram, so be sure to give us a like or a follow there if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.